Here is that Google trade. This is follow up too. We had the knee jerk reaction in video one to show the new MMTs what it would be like. Now we're printing right back down here on the bid of 769. Google beats by 89 cents. Reports revs in line. Reports Q1 March earnings of 11.58 per share. That's 89 cents better than Capital IQ consensus. What a nice blowout number on the prelim. Was very nice. But look at where the stock is trading. That's called volatility. So far we like that. Revenues rose 35% year to year to 11.01 billion versus the 11.1 billion that was the consensus. Okay, Google revenues were 12.95 billion or 93% of consolidated revenues in the first quarter of 2013, representing a 22% increase over the first quarter of 2012. How about that? But look at the stock. Look at the after hours volatility. Google owned sites generated revenues of $8.64 billion. How about that? That's a 67% of the total Google revenues in the first quarter of 2013. This represents an 18% increase. So isn't that nice, MMTs? Over Google partner sites. So you have Google partner sites that generated revenues of 3.26 billion. That's 25% of the global part of the Google revenues in the first quarter of 2013. This represents a 12% increase from the first quarter of 2012. How great. Google Network. So let's talk about Google Network revenues of 2.91 billion. Very nice. Other revenues from Google were 1.05 billion or 8% of the total gross revenues in the first quarter of 2013. So we're going to get more into about aggregated pay clicks later with our MMTs. This is what is happening on that blowout number when the revenues are reporting in line MMTs. We will look at buying the dips on this name tomorrow. It's still the bull is the bull. And what it's going to do is that everyone had price targets of 950 or $1,000 on Google. The thing about it is the lows were here today. That was the low. And we're all over the map. That is the earnings report. Google revenues totaled outside of the United States 7.1 billion, representing 55% now of the total Google revenues in the first quarter of 2013. That's very strong compared to 54% in the fourth quarter of 2012. That was very important for me to let you know that that is a very good number for it. But everyone is probably wondering, why is Google down? Well, I'll tell you why, so that people like us can buy it a lot cheaper in that next bull cycle. One of the things that we will talk about later is that the aggregate paid clicks increased approximately 20% over the first quarter of 2012 and increased approximately 3% over the fourth quarter of 2012. That's the aggregated paid clicks. Average cost per click decreased. Average cost per click decreased approximately 4% over the first quarter of 2012 and decreased approximately 4% over the fourth quarter of 2012. Revenue was 25% in the first quarter of 2013 compared to 25% in the first quarter of 2012. Operating revenues were 4.55 billion in the first quarter of 2013 or 33% of revenues compared to 3.47 billion in the first quarter of 2012 or 33% of revenues. Motorola mobile operating loss, GAAP operating loss for Motorola, that's that acquisition that they did, was 271 million or 27% of the Motorola mobile revenues in the first quarter of 2013. All eyes are going to be on that, I can tell you. The cash flow and capital expenditures, well, they have a free cash flow of 2.43 billion. We expect to continue to make significant capital expenditures, cash, as of March 31 of 2013, cash equivalents, and marketed securities were 50.1 billion for Google. How about that? But once again, MMTs, it's how to buy the dip, sell the rips, and not only that is to understand what those earnings mean. And tomorrow, we're going to be very aggressive on these options. So, this is the Google's premier earnings release. We went over a lot of it. We'll do a lot of other work. So Google revenues were 12.95 billion or 93% of consolidated revenues.